value creation is captured by very few firms. And it's known and understood that for every wealthy or endowment or whatever, one should allocate a couple of percent to the leading global venture capital funds. The problem is one doesn't get in. And so what we're building is really a diversified access, so indexing those tier one venture capital funds, of course overweight in the USA, because as you just said also, that's unfortunately still where most of the value creation is happening. And so that's really like a compelling product essentially, and we're pooling the capital, starting with the biggest families in Germany, because I am German. Yep. And so it's been really an exciting journey so far.
Yeah, talk to us about Europe and sort of the VC space over there. Give us a sense of, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges there right now, because we've got a good sense of sort of what's happening over here in Asia, of course, with, central banks and sort of the rate easing cycle and some of the sort of thematics playing out. But is it different over in Europe?
Well, Europe, generally Europe, of course, is not in the best place at the moment. That's clear. And in terms of venture capital, the talent is there. We have some phenomenal universities coming out of the UK, Germany, France. So especially when it comes to AI, because there it's a lot about mathematics, and the mathematical talent is exceptional in Europe. What we do lack in Europe is, first of all, the amount of capital, so that the funding there is not quite the same as, for example, in the US. There's still quite a big difference, and that really stops these startups from scaling quickly, because it requires a lot of capital to scale. And so we're always seeing many startups, when I see it myself every day, that they then go to the US to scale, which is a real pity, because we lose them from Europe, And secondly, of course, also geographically, it's still difficult to scale in Europe, because going from one country to the next, the regulatory framework is always very difficult, and so that's also always a challenge. So there's a big petition now to try and make it easier for startups to scale across borders in Europe, but of course it takes time.
It's fascinating that you say that, because I was having a very similar conversation with another sort of former athlete, sports star, Kazuki Honda, about his fund, and similar sort of lines as far as Japan versus the US and some of the challenges around it. But how do you navigate that in Europe?
Yeah, so Keisuke and I also hung out here in Singapore, so I know him well, and amazing journey he's also done in venture capital. And now I forgot your question.
Just how you sort of navigate that as far as capital in Europe. No doubt, as I said, you're able to sort of leverage your networks to help some of these founders, but obviously with many setting their sights on the US, and obviously the US being, such a market that really dominates in this space. As I said, how do you sort of get around that in Europe?
Well, Europe, it has to impress more also, yeah. And one difficulty is always also the M&A and IPO space in Europe. It's always a bit more delayed, the liquidity events, compared to the US. So hopefully if that reopens in the US and then Europe now, hopefully we can get a bigger dynamic going there, and more capital will be again allocated to European venture capital. That would be great. For us, we're tapping into families who generally have little VC exposure. So it's like actually we're tapping into new capital which hasn't been deployed into VC yet. So that's why we've been able to accelerate our journey also very quickly, and been able to grow our assets under management to 100 million essentially starting last year. So it's been really a great acceleration for us.